I'm Steve Ledoux, Town Manager here in Acton. We're going to be talking today with Andy Brockway, who is Chair of the Kelly's Corner Steering Committee, about some of the zoning issues and capital project that is coming in front of town meeting this year. Town meeting, as you may know, starts April 4th, Monday, April 4th. It is anticipated that we will be dealing with the Kelly's Corners issues on Tuesday, April 5th. One of the first articles coming out as we start town meeting. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you.
And what we're really talking about is Articles 22 and 23 at the annual town meeting warrant. You know, I know folks have been working on Kelly's Corner for quite some time. We always know that as an intersection, it's got certainly a lot of issues with it. Okay, so why a plan and why now? Why are we dealing with Kelly's Corner now?
Well, as you've stated, Kelly's Corner has been an issue in town for a long time. As recently as a few years ago, when the town meeting approved this particular study, they reinforced the idea that they're looking for some form of resolution within Kelly's Corner. Why a plan? I mean, what we've seen over time is sort of a series of ad hoc development. You can see it both in terms of the physical infrastructure, the sort of buildings that don't relate to each other, sidewalks that sort of don't go particularly anywhere. The overall sort of infrastructure in terms of traffic management, for example, needs a much sort of broader, deeper look at it. So there's a need for a comprehensive plan to look at Kelly's Corner.
And I think some folks maybe don't know how we define Kelly's Corner, because I think some people just think of that intersection. So maybe if you could just kind of define the kind of region of what we're considering Kelly's Corner.
So basically speaking, Kelly's Corner to the south is along 27, about towards the end of where the Kmart line is, running north along 27 up towards about where Acton Medical is. And so it would include the Roach Brothers Shopping Center, all down towards where the new CVS is. On the school side, it goes up, again, sort of the backside of Kmart, but ends there. Just as an example of what's not within the Kelly's Corner zoning district, although it appears to be within Kelly's Corner, are the old school that's become housing, and then those new condos that you see across the street from the Gold Station.
Okay. So how was the Kelly's Corner plan developed?
So I think we hired a planning consultant, the Cecil Group out of Boston, as well as a transportation consultant to look at the project. We had a series of meetings with them over the course of the last 2 years to look, again, more particularly at the infrastructure plan and broadly at sort of overall sort of zoning issues. And so had a series of steering committee meetings. We've had 4 public forums. The last one I gave a presentation, I think February 4th, sort of outlined where we were. And so that's in a sense, we've had a great deal of outreach to people within this Kelly's Corner community, business leaders, property owners, and the like. So,
now I know you've been involved with the 2020 committee, which is kind of the overarching group looking at town issues in general, town zoning, planning issues in general. How does the Kelly's Corner project relate to some of those broader issues like a walkable community, smart growth, those type of things?
Well, as you state, one of the things Acton 2020 is doing is looking at implementing the community plan, and so within that there's ideas about sort of, there are within Acton, what's interesting about Acton is that there are a set of villages. So for example, there's South Acton, there's West Acton, which has a little bit of commercial, a little bit of residential. We have a commercial strip along 2A, and then we have what are basically our civic centers, so that we have town hall and the library, for example. But we don't have per se a town center, so that the civic center is divorced from anything else literally within town. And so one of the objectives would be to, again, create a town center, not necessarily a prototypical New England town center, but one that would function as sort of this geographical and sort of central area within town. In order to do that, you need to, at some level, make it a walkable town center. You need to change somewhat the relationship now that exists between pedestrians and cars within Kelly's Corner. And so,
Okay, so what are some of the basic components of the plan that's coming to town meeting, like zoning revisions? What's envisioned with the infrastructure, the $756,000 we're seeking to fund some of the capital pieces?
okay. So there are two basic components that are working together. One is the zoning updates and revisions, and then the other is the infrastructure plan. The idea is that they work together. They are technically independent, but the idea is that if you were to do them together, they get more benefit. So within the zoning, again, the basic idea is to create a formal sort of framework that would allow for a sort of coherent sense of growth within Kelly's Corner, and that overall would, in the long run, produce again a sort of more walkable town center. The highlight of the zoning revisions is the idea of having master plan developments, and what's in the master plan development, they would occur on certain lots within Kelly's Corner that are both larger in terms of square footage and have longer street frontage. And the idea behind that is that we were looking again to sort of aggregate smaller sites to get, again, sort of more coherency, getting more of a street front to get a presence again where people will be more likely pedestrians more likely to congregate. Also, it will reduce the number of curb cuts, one of the issues that are related to infrastructure. In a master plan development, there are three lots now that are currently eligible to be in the master plan development. More could be eligible if over time they aggregate. So right now there's what we'll call the Kmart quadrant, Kmart site. There's a site that actually CVS is on, the new CVS, even that one is eligible. And then there's the overall Roach Brothers site. And again, other sites can aggregate over time. And so within that plan, any of those plans, you're eligible, although you don't have to, but you're eligible to have, there are three things basically. You can have some increased density. With that increased density will come greater building height, at least in terms of the buildings that are not on the street front. And then there's a mixed-use residential component allowable. Again, there are limitations on that. And so all of those things, also within the master plan though, the town has a much greater say in the ultimate discretionary say in the way the project will look. We can have an earlier role and review in the project and a greater discretionary say than currently allowed under basic zoning. And I think that's an important issue to state in terms of we've experienced recent development within Kelly's Corner that's really been on an ad hoc basis, and it's put us at a harder position to sort of really plan. And so that's some of the fundamental things within the zoning.
And you know, in terms of the mixed use, I mean, you know, it's clear that the kind of the current trend is to have kind of mixed use, that, you know, have residential and commercial kind of together, kind of do the walkability thing and all that. Do you have any sense of if there's mixed use development with housing, rough estimate of kids' impact on schools if this thing comes to be?
So again, if we were to look at the Kmart quadrant, so including Kmart, the Verizon site, the Baker Oil, that whole site, we've done an estimate, if you were to fully build out that site with a maximum allowable residential component, you might have added to the schools 20 to 70 kids on a one-time basis. Maybe our numbers are a little low, maybe it's 100 kids that would come into the school system. Over the next 10 years, the school system is projected to have a decrease in enrollment school-wide of over 800 students. And so there should not be any impact in terms of the school, in terms of added infrastructure, added teachers, and the like. I know there's some debate about whether or not any additional students will add cost overall to the town. But clearly, the school has the capacity to handle any number of students that were to be projected.
Yeah, and some of it I would guess would be a function of how many bedrooms a dwelling unit would it be having in any of these developments? Because, clearly if it's a 2-bedroom apartment, the amount of kids that might be generated in that could be different than,
Right. And you'll get some interest in these sites if there's residential because they're close to schools, so you'll
Yeah.
probably get a little bit higher because of that. On the other hand, one of the ideas behind this is in town, as many people know, there's a concern about sort of downsizing for people who are at that point in life. And you can see over near the Quail Ridge Golf Course, all sorts of development in terms of, I think that's 50, I'm not sure whether that's 55 plus.
I think it's 55 plus. Yeah.
But there's a real interest in that in town. There's not, so there's a real demand. There's not an adequate supply.
Yeah.
So one of the aspects of this, in terms of going back to this idea about 2020, is that there's a possibility here through the residential to address some of that market. It's not going to address the entire thing, but it is one aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we know that, Article 23 would appropriate $756,000 to kind of do the final design for Kelly's Corner. So what would be the process, the time frame, and the cost related to completing design and then moving forward to complete that project?
Okay. So you're referring to the infrastructure piece there.
Right.
And so there's the infrastructure piece is designed, there's several pieces, several parts to it. So just within the roadway, we're looking to reduce traffic congestion and improve traffic management, improve safety and the like. And so that would include, for example, in the proposed plan, adding some turning lanes, adding a traffic light up near where the Gulf Station is, a series of sort of sidewalks, smaller pedestrian plazas and the like, added crosswalks, islands within the roadway, bike lanes. So a full sort of integrated solution to what's there. As far as the process goes, the intention is to receive funding for the construction through the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and the regional planning organizations funding the so-called TIP, or Transportation Improvement Programs. And so in order to be involved in go through the TIP process, we need to take the design from where it is now, which is essentially conceptual design, and bring it up to another level in so-called 25% design. And so that aspect of it costs roughly $320,000 or so in design fees to get to that point. At that point, we will know then at that point whether or not we will receive approval to go forward with the final design. So there's another I forget the number, 430,000 or so to complete. This is all estimated, the design. So what we need to do for town meeting is commit to that. We need to make sure, or we need to recognize that we will commit overall to funding the project through in order to get the TIP approval at 25%. That doesn't mean when we get to 25%, if for some reason they want us to look at something else or they're not going to approve it, that we have to commit to the last 420,000 or so in funding.
Okay.
So the process will take upwards of 2-3 years from if we get approval to go forward to sort of completing the design process. And it could take, on average, perhaps 5 years before we'd be ready to actually start construction, just working our way through the so-called TIP process.
And I think it's important for our viewers to note that what we're talking about is really, in this case, Article 23, which would ask the town to appropriate $756,000 for all the design components that Andy just talked about, and the proposed funding of this $756,000 would be a bond, which would require a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So you've talked a little about how the construction could be funded. I know that's a very competitive grant, but hopefully, as you say, once we've get all our kind of local funding in place, that the state will see our commitment to the project and see how important it is. And
I think one of the things working in our favor is that we've worked with the state in the past on the Bruce Freeman rail trails, and with the local planning, or the regional planning organizations. And so we've had active communication with them on this project in particular. It's also close to Route 2, which they have an interest in. And it's important to note that Route 111 is a state highway.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
Yeah.
a town actually doesn't control that. And that's
Right.
one of the issues here, that regardless of what we do, most of the work's going to take place around that intersection, or at least start around that intersection. And so we have to work with the state on this.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I do think, though, that we have a strong track record in the past working with the state, and there's, again, interest from the state. As it relates to zoning, the TIP process, they've sort of looking now to fund projects that are more than just literal infrastructure projects. And so in that sense, they would favor projects that have more of a sort of community development aspect to it. To the extent that that plays into the funding, to the extent that approving the zoning changes, which again would go towards trying to establish a more a town center, to the extent that that plays into the transportation funding process, it's our understanding that that has an impact. It'd be favorable to sort of have the zoning in place.
Okay. We've been talking with Andy Brockway, who is the chair of the Kelly's Corner Steering Committee, and we've been focused on Articles 22 and 23 at the annual town meeting starting April 4th. Once again, the Kelly's Corner issues will come up on the second night, April 5th, and we'll be talking at that point about the zoning and the capital infrastructure. Andy, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show, and appreciate this, and thank our viewers for watching, and we'll see you at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.